What's going on, family? This is Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. Let's take a look at Harlem's finest. And we're going to examine a fight that took place November 14th, 1929, between two of the greatest middleweights of all times. Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt, and Jack McVey. They were both colored middleweight champions. And I have Harry Smith, top 4 greatest middleweight of all time. And I also have him, the greatest colored middleweight champion of all times. Now, yes, you did have Charlie Burley and Holman Williams and Coco Kidd. And of course, the legendary Sam Langford. These were all colored middleweight champions. But in my opinion, Harry Smith was the very best. And we're going to examine that fight with Harry Smith and Jack McVey, as well as their careers and profiles, right here on a Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. Two of the finest, no question about it. Now, Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt, was born October 28, 1907 in Jamaica, British West Indies. He died September 19, 1933 in Chicago, Illinois. He stood 6 feet. He weighed 158 to 176 pounds. He was managed by Dave Brown. Now, Dave Brown would be the man that would introduce Harry Smith to the famous Grubbs Gym. Grubbs Gym was located in Harlem on 116th Street, and it would produce some of the greatest fighters of all times. Fighters such as Kid Norfolk, Sugar Ray Robinson. Of course, you had Joe Sadler, later Sandy Sadler, Danny Cox, George Godfrey, many fighters. And it would be at that gym, would be his first experience of slipping on a pair of old wrinkled brown boxing gloves. He would learn to skip rope and hit the speed bag, heavy bag, sandbag, wall bag. And he would become a great fighter. But Harry Smith would punch like a mule kick. He would have a trip through his amateur ranks. And he began March 4th, 1927. And he knocked out Tom Ferrio in Harlem, January 28th, while competing in the finals of the 1928 Metropolitan Amateur Tournament at Madison Square Garden. Now, Harry was supposed to be a dentist. His father was a wealthy businessman, and he owned a fleet of taxi cabs. He owned half of Harlem. You see, Harry Smith didn't have to fight, but it was in his blood for some reason. He just loved using his hands, and he felt he could be a very, very good fighter. So on March 4th, 1928, Smith made his professional debut, scoring a 5th-round knockout of Gene McHugh at the Olympic Club in Harlem, New York. Harry Smith had a 12-0 record with 10 knockouts. No fighter made it past the 5th round. I mean, you couldn't pass 5 rounds with Harry Smith because he punched that hard. And as they said, he punched like a mule kick. Harry Smith had an amateur record of 60-0 with 55 knockouts. Unbelievable. Smith was the best amateur in the country. He offered an opportunity to try for the Olympic squad, but turned it down. Smith easily knocked out Gary Leach and the black spoiler Holman Robinson. Former national amateur champion, July 15, 1929. Not even Panama Joe Gans or Maxie Rosenblum. Jeff Smith, he was an outstanding fighter from New Jersey. Cuban Bobby Brown from Philadelphia. Frank Moody, and many other great middleweights can accomplish this feat. Now, after many great fights, the big fight would eventually come between the colored middleweight champion, Jack McVey. Jack was an idol in Harlem. He was the Sugar Ray Robinson of his time. And they would meet November 17th, 1929 at the Olympic AC in Harlem, New York. And he packed the house, and the crowd would not be disappointed. You see, Jack McVey took charge early in the fight. He pressed the taller Smith, got him against the ropes, hit him with left hands and right uppercuts. He dug to the body and came up to the head. He would move like a locomotive against the great Harry Smith. Now, after a brutal 15-round affair, the judges Sam Austin and Joe Harding declare Smith the new champion. Now, Harry Smith would next sign with Brownsville veteran Silver Giles. Silver Giles was some fighter. He would also face Powell Silvers, and he would face him on January 1930. They would rack up a famous Broadway arena. January 7th, 1930, they both weighed in at 157 pounds. Harry pushed Silver from bell to bell, non-stop, with combinations that you've never seen before. Smith faced greats like Mickey Walker, Larry Gans, Ace Hutchins. He's also known as the Nebraskan Wildcat. Maxie Rosenblum, and Leo Lomsky. But he would face Canadian light heavyweight champion Charlie Ballinger. Charlie Ballinger was a phenomenal fighter and an outstanding puncher. October 23rd, 1930, William Gorilla Jones, 10 rounds. He would defeat him in New York's Joe Anderson, 3rd round knockout. These are all outstanding fighters. October 2nd, 1931, Harry Smith he put a stake on the eye of all his opponents, and he would have a record of 56 and 47 knockouts. He was perhaps one of the greatest fighters of all times, was Harry Smith. Now, Jack McVey would be known as Julius Williams, the pride of Harlem. He was born June 8th, 1905, and he unfortunately died October 29th, 1975. He was 70 years of age at the time of his death. He began his professional career November 23rd, 1920 as a middleweight. He stood 5 foot 9 inches, and he was born in Athens, Georgia, but he would reside in Harlem, New York. He would have a fighting record of 142 bouts, 88 wins, 29 knockouts, and he was actually lost 41 himself, and he was stopped 6 different occasions. But I got to tell you, he was in there with great fighters such as Eddie Floyd, Chester Pulleris, Harry Foreman. Of course, he was in there with Harry Smith, Tiger Thomas, Vincent Florio, Indian Tiger West, Nick Verno, Ace Huskins, the Nebraska Wildcat. He was in there with some of the greatest fighters of his time. But when he fought Harry Smith, at that time Harry Smith had a fighting career record of 21-0. Because that's the kind of fighter Harry Smith was. They would fight at the Olympia, at the Box Club in New York. And Harry Smith would lose his title. Jack McVey would lose his title to Harry Smith. For some reason, I'm getting these two mixed up today. But I just wanted to introduce you to these great fighters, Harry Smith and Jack McVey. Two of the finest fighters of their time. And like I said, I have Harry Smith, number 4 greatest middleweight. And I have him number 1 as the greatest colored middleweight champion of all times. I'm excited about these two men because they're hardly mentioned. And Harry Smith is one of the greatest fighters in history. Salute. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Harry Smith and Jack McVey. Salute to these dynamic fighters. Bruce Flowers from Yonkers, New York. Outstanding lightweight. Jack Warren, phenomenal light heavyweight. Harry Dudley, California speedball, bantamweight. Outstanding fighter he was. He was a very good boxer. Was Harry Dudley. Lee Anderson, he would be my next fighter. I would have Lee Anderson and Kid Norfolk. We'll do that video next. Cecil Harris, another dynamic fighter. Sammy Baker, phenomenal heavyweight from California. He could punch. And just to show you a few opponents that trained in the famous Grubbs Gym. The Sugar Man, Walker Smith, better known as Ray Robinson, learned all his skills under the tutelage of Pee Wee Field and Harry Wiley, trainers at the famous Grubbs Gym for the 1930s and the 1950s. I'll be covering this fighter here along with Lee Anderson next. But this is the famous Kid Norfolk. He also trained at the famous Grubbs Gym. Perhaps he was one of the greatest fighters of all times himself. John Henry Lewis would pass through Grubbs Gym as well. He would become light heavyweight champion 1935 to 1939. He would defeat Bob Olin, and he would be stripped of his title due to medical reasons. Another phenomenal fighter who would train in the famous Gloves gym was a colored heavyweight champion, Harry Wills. Harry Wills was cheated out of an opportunity to face Jack Dempsey 1924 and 1926 for the World Heavyweight Championship. What was done to Harry Wills to avoid fighting him was a disgrace. I just wanted to show you a few opponents of the famous Gloves gym. These men trained, sweat and tears, to become the very best. And they all did it in Harlem, New York, in the famous Gloves gym. Salute to my subscribers. Thanks again for your time on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series, Scrapbook Boxing. Until next time, look out for Kid Norfolk and Lee Anderson. Peace.